as we continue here with the America's Future Series and our Space Innovation Summit. David, I'll toss it over to you as we say thanks to the General. And
I want to say thanks to the General, and I want to say, gosh, Preston Dunlap, and all of your efforts around dual-use technology and investing in the ecosystem of innovation.
Absolutely.
Please call on us. We want to support that. That's what we're all about. And that's what the folks that are coming on now with Bill Marion are all about: innovation, advanced technologies, making sure capabilities are put in the hands of the warfighter faster, all that sort of good things. So, Bill, I want to thank you for coming on. If you would, please tell the audience a little bit about yourself and, of course, about your guests. And we want them to hear from you, so we'll step out of your way, and we look forward to your great conversation.
Very good. Definitely appreciate that, and good to see Harry and Preston again. Great session there. I got to get a few minutes there. Certainly my honor to lead the next fireside chat. Again, this whole session honoring General Hyten as well, and the great award that was recognized yesterday. Have my honor here to introduce Roy Rockwell, who's the colonel and commander out at Delta 6. Leading a lot of our cyber efforts inside the space community and the space domain. And then General Ed Wilson, of course, former 16th Commander, 24th. I always get those backwards, but we name change a little bit. But I think even more importantly is a lot of the work he did from a policy perspective, kind of shaping the way we look at cyber across the whole of government. So I'm Bill Marion. I'm the Managing Director for the Air Force and Space Force account here at Accenture Federal. After about almost 30 years with the Air Force across CIO and CTO roles, kind of the early days of information operations and cyber and IT. So I get to lead this panel today, and I will hand it over first to Roy, to Rocky, to introduce himself. And I'm going to give him one softball right off the top, which is really, what are you thinking about these days? What's the one thing that keeps you up at night that you may, kind of give us a little bit of early side of what we're going to talk about today.
Hey, sir, it's great to be a part of this fireside chat. So thank you for the opportunity. As you said, I'm Roy Rockwell, Commander of Space Delta 6. I've been in the seat now for almost 2 years. On the 26th of July is when we stood up all the deltas across the Space Operations Command. And so it's been an exciting time. I did transfer from the Air Force to the Space Force as part of that process. So I'm super excited to be a part of this new service, and just the opportunity to be a plank holder and standing up one of the new deltas, operational deltas. Over the last 2 years, our focus has really been on standing up our defensive cyberspace operations strategy and vision for the Space Force. And so we also have another mission in Space Delta 6, and that's the satellite control network and ensuring we have that space access capabilities for both today and our future space on-orbit space missions moving forward. We're going to stand up 5 new squadrons this summer, cyberspace squadrons this summer, solely focused on defending each of the Delta's mission areas and their mission systems. We'll grow those out of your initiative, the ITAS initiative that you helped move forward for the Air Force, and we're able to gain some manpower from that and stand those squadrons up to better defend. What keeps me up at night? The adversary does a lot about what keeps me up at night. What is the threat to our space mission systems? And cyber is right at the forefront of those threats, because the low cost to get into to disable our ground systems right out the gate. It really doesn't matter what we do in space if they eliminate our ground systems and the way our digital service is connected. Because as General Raymond often says, we are a digital service. We're probably one of the first digital service, because everything we do in space is reliant on that digital architecture that we built to operate and control it. So that's what keeps me up at night.
Good. Let me pass it over to Ed.
Yeah. Hey, Bill. Good to see you. Good to see you, Rocky. Hey, Ed Wilson, for those who don't know me, spent about 25 years in the space community. Started off as a design engineer way back in the mid-'80s, and kind of grew up. Spent about 10 years off and on in the National Reconnaissance Office. Spent a lot of time in space operations. Last ops job was working down at Cape Canaveral as the commander down there, moving the commercial team onto the range in the form of SpaceX on their first couple of launches. But that was the high side. The low side was overseeing the launch of the last 5 shuttles with the NASA team. That was a bit of a sad spot in our history. I was asked to cross over, did about last 8, 9, almost 10 years now I've been spent on the cyber operations policy development side of the house. And as Bill highlighted, the commander of 24th Air Force, we've changed the name to protect the guilty is really what's going on. Yeah. Quite an honor to do that. And then when I retired, was asked to come back and served as the DASD for cyber policy on the OSD staff. So we put in place a series of things in the form of strategy, some Title X changes, working with Congress, and a new national security process for approving or disapproving offensive and defensive cyber operations, which I'm real proud to have been a part of. Great team that got those across the finish line. Keeping myself up at night, to Rocky's point, cyber threats have been on my list for quite some time. I think the last decade or so. I think I've went on record multiple times as the 24th Air Force and it's the DASD saying that cyber threats, when speaking to space audiences, that's the #1 threat in my mind, and to the points that Rocky said. I guess I double down on Rocky's to give you a new one. I think as a taxpayer, but also in the national security community, I think in the strategic environment we're in right now with inflation compounding problems, I think we're going to be challenged in the near term and long term on innovation, which is the topic we're going to discuss. I think that's going to put pressure on the whole community, not just space or cyber, but the whole community. It's going to chew into those margins that we usually find for rock solid innovation, the ability to organically within units or organizations to find those small dollars and chase innovation. My experience is when we're in economic hard times, those dollars become hard to find, unfortunately. And so that's what I think kind of near term and maybe midterm, maybe not long term, but I think we may be challenged with here in the future.
I think as we kind of prep some for the call here, I mean, the whole idea around the wage inflation, but also the knowledge base, the skill sets, the upskilling, you put those two pressures together of not enough people in the workforce, along with this distinct upskilling with respect to cyber, AI, ML, data-centric operations. I know we'll dive into that one today, but I do think that's frankly the one that keeps me up at night is now on the industry side of matching up skills and upskilling and driving and still the industry pressures that come with being a publicly held company and those kind of things. So I think that collision is absolutely real. I was really going to start first a little bit the tactical level because we're going to build up through this fireside hopefully, but really start with tech. I mean, I would argue, tech isn't normally what kills or starts the game, but it is absolutely starts to be one of the foundational elements when you talk cyber inside of the space domain. And so, in the previous discussion with Preston and Harry, we talked about agility and speed and really sometimes people would say, that's not space, right? That's not the space we live in. But I think we all recognize, and Rocky, I know you're passionate in a couple areas here on where do you see tech fundamentally changing the game with respect to speed and agility and scalability, if you will, in cyber and also in the space domain?
Well, sir, I think we have to move from our physical mission system platforms to more software-defined architectures and software-defined networks. I think it gives us the ability to be a lot more agile moving forward. It's going to take us 7 to 10 years, most likely, to get there if we start today. But as we look at actively defending those space mission systems from our adversary cyber attacks, we have to lay in that foundation now for software-defined architectures to modernize those space mission platforms. Some of the things that that'll do for us as we think about it, just real quickly, its ability to streamline our cradle-to-grave cybersecurity and cyber defense operations. Today, as I look at how do I get after defending every one of these space mission systems with realistically, 6 to 7 cyber squadrons, that's a lot of terrain to try and defend. And so we need those capabilities from machine learning and AI to really help inform where we pay attention to and how do we articulate where are those CVEs most likely to come up and find their way in. We kind of pre-gamed a little bit and talked about digital twinning. What does a digital twin do for us? I think that's important as part of these software-defined architectures. Number one, from a defensive perspective, If an adversary gets in to a software-defined architecture, I can stand up a digital twin 100 times, mitigate those vulnerabilities until I get the adversary out of that specific operating system, right? In today's physical mission system, it becomes a game of whack-a-mole where my active defenders are going up against the adversary. We may gain some ground, we may lose some ground, but it's essentially almost a trench warfare type of capability in today's physical mission systems from a cyberspace perspective. The other thing that digital twinning does for us is from a training perspective, right? It gives you the most realistic training environment for our operators, right? And so every time we have a new iteration of that mission system released, which, software-defined architectures really are continuous delivery, continuous integration. If you look at how Netflix develops software for streaming movies, that's kind of the thought process. Is it's a 24/7 continuous cycle of new delivery of capability. But from a digital twin perspective, that training environment then looks exactly like the real world environment. And so we can tear it apart and blow it up and do all kinds of things, both from a cyber perspective and from a space operations perspective, with those software-defined architectures. General Kim Kreider, who led a panel yesterday with Dr. Costa and Miss Lauren Knossenberger and a couple of others, she was really the thought behind supercoders. And I think that's a great initiative. It kind of helps get us out there on how do we begin to look at defining how we move to this software-defined architecture. But we haven't given them the environment or the tools to do the mission yet, to do the things we've trained them to do. So we absolutely need to figure out how to get them the tools and the environments to build those capabilities for us. So
yeah, I think Ed, you saw some of that yourself, and as 24th, are we getting the right ecosystem of tools and flexibility to our operators? But I think you also touched on some of the upskilling stuff in there as well, Rocky. So, but Ed, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, maybe just a couple of quick thoughts. To Rocky's point, I think digital twinning, I think one of the things that feeds that really well is digital engineering. And so we see that on some of the big major defense programs, MDPs, like the B-21, GBSD, Economic Class, et cetera. So we're beginning to see real success stories there. To be able to gain some speed, a little more precision in terms of how we develop and then lock down designs and move forward. And then really a byproduct becomes digital twinning capability for upgrades, for training purposes, for all the above. So I think that's going to be a huge enabler. All things that are great always have some weaknesses. I think we really have to pay attention to our supply chain when we've got digital engineering going on, because that IP, that national security, the sensitive, information, whether it's classified or not, the aggregation of that is very easy to do in those environments. So we've got to really pay attention to the security aspects of it. I love, and it's come up a couple of the sessions here, so the software factories for DevSecOps. Love it. Big fan of it. Been a huge fan of it for many, many years. I think we're seeing, the continued growth of that. I think as we look at that, the question I would have as we move along is how do we gain a bit more efficiency at times? And I'm not, looking for more bureaucracy, but we kind of have a raindrop, there's raindrops of software factories out there. Not all are created equal. There's more success stories than others, and so I think a bit of a strategy kind of at the strategic level about how to handle those to get the most out of that investment. Because I think we're going to begin to outstrip some of the talent. So super coach, my fear would be we're not growing enough talent that can be successful in those environments. And so I think we need to pay attention to that talent pool for the DevSecOps. And then the last one would be is anytime we're doing any kind of work in the cyber environment, you really got to pay attention to the data, and have a strategy there. Follow the data, right? And I think like when you look at big data platforms, et cetera, I think the intel community and our, like 16th Air Force has done a really nice job of aggregating or bringing analytics to those problem sets. I think we need to learn some lessons and move over. After having gotten out of government service, I keep bumping into event streaming really heavy as a way to kind of tame down legacy data. legacy platforms, and then to be able to harness the power of, Rocky comment on Netflix. I would point to the Uber, Lyft examples where I see command and control, on a full experience involved in those programs. You can just see it, thousands of things happening at a time in a very discrete way, with lots of control, real-time data moving in a secure fashion, to include financial transactions. So when you think about those, I think we're going to need to harness a lot of that, which I know the software factors are getting after, but that's not commonplace in the department yet. And then the last would be that edge computing, for the data. That's going to be a must-have in the space community.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more on the data piece of it. We have a pretty strong cyber practice inside of Accenture. One of the things that I think one of the reasons is because you focus on the data, you focus on the events, you focus on the process. It's not about the tools. Be very tool agnostic, if you will, because it's all about how you kind of integrate and take that data and actually make it actionable. So we sometimes say seams and sores and all that kind of technical terms, but it's a data science problem, and then it's a remediation problem from there of how do you automate. It's kind of the detection to bang kind of response that's always the challenge in warfighting.
Yeah, Bill, and I would just say the automation piece, especially for like Rocky's teams, any of the defensive teams, to have us doing, the guys and gals doing manual forensics on data, which is kind of the old school. We need to automate. There's great tools out there to allow that to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that speed is really key. The other angle I wanted to take here, and I know in cyber, one of the things is change, right? And we talk a lot about this mission assurance culture that we had in kind of space and how that really impacts how we look at even cyber in the space domain. And so, and I'll probably start with you, but I'd be curious how you think the ecosystem is starting to adopt these things like continuous ATOs and fast track, but more importantly, this discussion around how you take risk in an imperfect, I'll call it unholy system, right? Because we know there are vulnerabilities. The key is how we react very quickly, which is oftentimes counter to, I would say, the legacy, mission assurance base that we had in space launch as an example, many moons ago. The current industry launch models are fundamentally different than hey, we'll wait 5 years before we launch something. So be curious how you see that risk domain, changing both in policy and action inside of this area.
Yeah, I'm passionate about this one. When I was in the space community, was down in Albuquerque working with the old ORS, Operational Responsive Space Team, and Space Phone Test Wing at the time, which were, I think, a little bit ahead of our time, if you will, because it was all about moving fast, keeping costs down, and accepting moderate levels of risk with your eyes wide open. So that's kind of truth in lending. You're getting a guy that's grown up in those environments a lot. I think we have really good risk acceptance and avoidance, kind of the calculus on the ops side. I don't think we have a problem there. I think where we've always struggled has been on the acquisition side and mission assurance when we go to get to orbit, right? And I think that's come from decades of bringing out and having very high cost systems in the space community. I know I felt it when I was down at 45th at the time, Space Wing, now Space Delta, and coming up to a launch event, working with the SMC team or NRO or NASA or whoever was launching. There was a heavy burden of kind of risk avoidance of catastrophic failures, right? Because you're up in those upper quadrants, right? The risk grows really fast and little things can have catastrophic failures. And so the mission assurance culture was burdensome, to say the least, and it was necessary. I think where commercial space industry is quickly taking us is this mindset of attributable environments where we accept some measures of risk and gain speed, and that's for business purposes, obviously. But I think for us in the national security community, the ability to field capability faster, and that may be in the form of smaller or more of them, and then having an attribution part of the fielding model. That's not natural for the space community. We're used to 1-to-1 ratios on orbit, right? From coming down the factory line to on orbit. And I think we're quickly getting there. I know I experienced that, just a quick anecdote. I'd be down at the 45th, beginning to work with Yeah, he put company names up, but SpaceX was kind of the lead sled dog in that line of companies coming. And if you look at the way that the Falcon 9 is put together, it's got 9 engines in that first stage. It's a totally different way of building a rocket in the United States. If you look to the Soviet Union, Russia, that was that model, but brought to, and there's a lot of other things that go on inside that. I don't want to unpack it, but I think it just gives you amount of mission assurance, knowing that there may be a failure, 1 or 2, depending on 1 or 2 engines could go out and still have a successful launch. And that's just kind of resiliency and mission assurance built into the design of a system. And I think that kind of trade-off space, and then have visibility on the production line, testing and flight data of 9 engines burning, in a first stage, there's a lot of gain there, both from a business perspective, but also from an insurance perspective. So I think the calculus we're dealing with on space systems and the way we build them and field them and operate them, I think we just need to address maybe in a different way. And I think we're doing the right things, especially the commercial side. It's really this LEO constellation concept that they're all coming along and really getting us there fast.
So Rocky, how do you think that applies to your stand-up of your cyber squadrons? I mean, what are there like challenges that they're seeing right now that, frankly, you're having to tackle, or at least C.L.A.S.S having to tackle? I mean, because I do think that's going to be again. It's not necessarily the tech. It's going to be, how do you lead them through that change and cultural change?
Well, to the mission assurance piece, we've always been struggling with this CVE, the vulnerability management piece across all of our mission systems, whether that's on the Air Force side or the Space Force side. Mr. Dunlap mentioned it earlier, is that's a huge challenge, is how do we mitigate those vulnerabilities quickly and expeditiously? But as we stand up, that's really we call that cybersecurity. We kind of define that as cybersecurity. Where we're focused on in cyber defense as we stand up these cyber squadrons is building active defenders that can go up against an adversary in a fight tonight scenario and be able to actively defend those mission systems. What I foresee today on some of the physical mission systems is that when the adversary decides to take out our ground-based capabilities, right? I see us going up actively against them and giving back to the space operators capability, because I think initially, right out the gate, based on what the intelligence tells us, we're going to have limited capabilities based on what I've seen in the intelligence. And so what we're able to give back to the space operators are then the missions that we're going to be able to perform in space on orbit.
Very good. Well, I know this has gone like gangbusters quick. Of course, I have to get 5 minutes back from Harry, but I think we'll do a little bit of wrap here just to get your closing thoughts. Again, doesn't have to be a what's keeping you up at night, but I will tell you, I mean, it goes back to Ed's first comment. I do think the workforce piece, when we look at if I was going to invest in one thing inside the space domain, it would probably be in that area, whether that's retention or whether that's growth or whether that's development. But I'd be curious as we close out. You can do your closing call points, or if you had $1 or one policy to change, what would it be? And I'll go to you, Ed, first, and let you.
Got it. Well, I mean, I think just in closing, I think we live in a really pivotal time, right? The strategic environment is more complex, more dynamic, put whatever language you want on it. And I'll just have to tip a hat. I think the Space Force, General Raymond and the whole team, they're doing a great job. If you pick up their strategy, pick up their vision, it's outstanding. Our ability to make decisions at speed and to execute, to implement the changes and the innovation that we're talking about, we still have a lot of headwinds and drag chutes out the back, in the bureaucracy associated with how we make decisions. And if I was to step back and look at it through an adversary lens, I'm not really competing with trying to keep up. I'm trying to close the gap, the strategic technology gap and warfighting gap that we have as a nation and that has been closing. I mean, you just got to I look at my time in the military and that has closed, right? It is closing fast and it seems to be gaining. And obviously the pacing threat being China. So I think that's going to be the challenge, and that's a culture shift. But the Space Force and the Space Command, they don't own all of that change. That has to come from some legislation changes on the acquisition side, personnel development. I think there's a huge burden to be played with the public-private partnership on the in the industry side of the house as well. And I think we kind of get back to some roots of the way we did business 20, 30 years ago, a little bit more closer relationships, and not like contract oversight kind of mechanisms get too much in the way. I think we've lost some of that culture, and I think it's good for development of our senior leaders and our junior leaders all up and down the stack. So I think we got a lot of work ahead of us, but I really love what I see coming out of the Space Force.
I couldn't agree more.
Proud to be American,
Absolutely. Rocky, I'll let you close this out with any final thoughts.
All right. Well, so I think going back, you said if I had $1, we really need industry's help to help us build an ecosystem that affords multi-level security, right? To be more effective, to share data with our allies, our partners in industry, an ecosystem that essentially allows us to log on and gain access to the data that we're clear to gain access to, and then share that data at the level we're clear to share it with. The ultimate goal should always be, how do we improve and fine tune the information our operators at the edge need and require to improve their decision making. From a data perspective, why is data important? If we look at the sports industry and how sports leverages data, right, to inform both the offense and defense, I would love to be able to get to that level and be able to give that to our warfighters out at the edge, space operators, our space operators and our joint warfighters at the edge. And then I'll just throw out in my final comment a plug, for Dr. Costa has developed a vision we're calling it the Space Verse. I'm super excited about what that Space Verse could and can be. And I'll just foot stomp that if we partner with industry, we give our super coders the software development environments and tools that they need, and then position our DCO operators in close proximity. I see these future synergies being the key to ensuring we provide a more active cybersecurity and defensive posture for our Space Force mission systems in the future.
Well, that's an outstanding analogy. As a former baseball player, I love the hit charts and where everybody's shifting now. And is it wrong? No, it's the shift. You got to play to where the other side's gonna go. And I think that's a great analogy to end on. So with that, we'll call it a wrap. I mean, that was an extremely fast 30 minutes, but thank you both for joining today. And again, thank you both from your prior and your future service for our country in this domain. It's absolutely critical. So thanks again, and back to you at the studio.
Thanks so much, Bill. You make a great analogy. The Colonel was spot on. As somebody that was a sports anchor for 30 years, I love the sports analogy myself. I thought it was great. So I was laughing just as you were. So we simply say thanks to both of your guests here, Bill. We're talking about the Major and the General. Above and beyond, once again, we can't thank you enough for being a part of the team here today on our second day of America's Future Series, and we really appreciate all you've done here today. And, of course, as Bill just mentioned, your incredible service for so many years. Thanks to you both so very, very much for being here today. And